Okay, let's get started, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this fireside chat. So this is going to be completely interactive. We're going to try to maintain time because Rob and I are up here and we love talking about identity. So anyway, the fireside chat is all around passwordless authentication for customers across all the different journeys. And we're going to talk about what that really means. But the benefit of this is that it's not just a bunch of slides talking to you about passwordless. You guys have heard a ton of that in the conference so far. It's actually hearing from somebody that's gone through practical implementation, and kind of discussing the challenges and what you should be thinking about as you're moving towards that trajectory. So just some intros here quickly. My name is Craig Currim. I'm CTO for Transmit Security. We've been around for about 7 years. And with me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rob Davis. Rob and I have known each other for quite some time, actually through two different companies. Today, Rob is Senior Vice President, Head of Digital and Customer Identity at Citizens Bank. Prior to that, he had a similar role at TIAA. And Rob has solved probably some of the most complex identity challenges that I've ever seen. Different infrastructures, different applications across two organizations, and he's worked with us really, really closely. So we're super happy to have him here. And just to kind of kick things off, Rob, I'd like you to kind of start things off with, maybe expanding on your background a little bit and talking about, some of the challenges that you've had across those two organizations. But also, in those challenges and, how you've approached solving the many identity problems, how you see that evolving into a passwordless world at some point.
Sure, thanks, and you're too kind on the compliments. So, Rob Davis, I'm at Citizens Bank. I've been there for almost 9 months, and before that, almost 10 years at TIAA. I'm represented there before that, Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. So I've been in the identity industry for almost 23 years, which makes me ancient in comparison. So when you hear things like me providing analogies with technologies like SiteMinder and that's where I came from, the old 351 days back when they were Netegrity. So I kind of grew up in the identity industry with that as a initial background. I took a more cybersecurity centric approach to identity in that a lot of what I looked at wasn't coding to the standards, but using the technologies to implement standards. I'm not a coder. I can't even consider myself really an in-depth engineer like, some of the folks in this room that I know. But I see the technologies, I understand the standards, and I have a pretty paranoid spin on things, having an offensive security background, being trained with pen testing and whatnot. So I look at ways to see how we can break things, abuse things, get around controls, and I try to use that experience to improve the customer experience. So when I say, I look at the customer experience, everybody says, low friction, no friction, but I say, a good customer experience includes a good customer security experience.
Fantastic, thanks for that. And in your roles across both of those companies, you've worked with us, you've used Transmit Solutions, in the context of both of those. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like what are some of the problems? We all know kind of identity is layered and there's many challenges across that. So can you talk just a little bit about how you've worked through those challenges and again, how they're leading you to, eradication of passwords?
Right. Again, growing up in this industry, at the beginning of the career, everything's a SiteMinder problem. And then everything's when you get into the MFA world, and you back in the early 2000s or 2010s, everything for us was an RSA problem, right? With multi-factor and the risk scoring, and then everything became for us a ping problem. And now I'm happy to say everything is a transmit problem. So in that journey, as you're evolving the type of security controls, you really have to think about, what are we doing for our customers? How are we bringing in all of the different signals, all of the different data points, so that we can make a decision to orchestrate that customer journey through enrollment, through new account opening, through your verification process, through authentication, trouble logging in, high risk transactions, and all of the different signals that you need to consume. When we first started this really in my previous company, that was done all through code, and we had maybe 150,000 lines of code that orchestrated all of that. So when we made changes, and we needed to make changes, or if there was an issue, that required us to go through all of that code to figure out what was wrong. And as you get turnover and resources leave and new resources join, that is a very expensive learning and training curve for those resources to understand what that code is. So, we brought in transmit security in the orchestration product, and immediately as we adopted it, we were able to remove 60,000 lines of code right out of our code base, and a lot of that had to do with the authentication process, the high-risk transaction process, some of the enrollment processes that were in play. And then coming to citizens, we have transmit security. Happy to know that most of the orchestration, most of those journeys are actually done starting in the transmit orchestration and those APIs. So a nice way to start off is a no-code, low-code solution.
Great. And as you move towards this passwordless approach, and you talked a lot about orchestration and being able to make everything kind of interoperate with throughout this journey, which by the way we show on the slide, right? So again, the key of this slide is for all of you to kind of consider and say, yeah, we talk passwordless, and my question, I guess, back to you, Rob, is like, do you consider it a feature, or do you consider it as something much more than that?
Yeah, password is definitely, the buzzword. It's the epitome of no friction, right? You want no passwords because not only is it, the customers are not going to have to remember their passwords, but the fraudsters won't be able to know how to log in. There's a inherent multi-factor, control in place, or at least, multiple factors. And just looking at the slide on there, when we're bringing a customer into, you have to understand you have an existing customer and then you have a new customer. And then your existing customer has passwords, right? And the existing customer goes through a whole, they've gone through a history of their passwords and of their account. So as you bring in a passwordless capability, you've got to enroll them and you've got to entice them into, getting rid of their passwords. When you have a new customer, which I think is mostly greenfield, right? If we can get new customers in with no passwords, then everything's going to be great. And then you do that at certain points along this life cycle, right? So you have an unknown customer, they do registration and enrollment, and then the proofing or the profiling. This is where passwordless comes in after you know who the customer is, right? After the verification. You don't ever do it before. And of course, you don't ever do it unless you're confident that you can verify that is the customer, because passwordless is a very high value control, right? So that, we look at different opportunities within the customer journey. Whether you're a new customer or you're an existing customer, we want to offer the use of, or the non-use of passwords, right? So passwordless for a new customer after sign up and verification. And we want to offer the existing customer the ability to do that after they've gone through some sort of high value transaction or high risk transaction that they've gone through an MFA. So now they're in a higher state of trust with you, and say, hey, can you want to get rid of your password, and offer that to them when they hit that condition. So different points along the way.
Yeah, makes total sense. And what I'm hearing there too, which I think is a key element, right, is that even when moving to a passwordless solution, you have to do it in such a way that it's built on top of an event where there's a high degree of trust or high degree of identity proof. So for example, you wouldn't want to log a user in with a legacy password and say, hey, would you like to go passwordless, okay? A prime example of what Rob is talking about is that I have a banking app, and my banking app, when I log in with a username and password, it asks me after the fact, would you like to enable Face ID? And I say yes, okay? Is that passwordless? That's convenience, okay? If I download the app on another device, guess what? I've got to log in with password. If I get a new device, I've got to log in with password, okay? It's using passwords less, but it's not passwordless, fully passwordless, which is how we define it at Transmit. So thanks for that, Rob. Makes total sense. And so, like, just to piggyback on that a little further, when you're going to a passwordless approach, like in your optimal mindset, how do you see that? Like, is it standards based? Leveraging FIDO, WebAuthn, all those things. We all know how significant that is now, right? Devices have evolved. WebAuthn is becoming mainstream, or is mainstream, with all the browser support and operating system support and so on. What about scenarios where you don't have that, right? There are legacy components, and passwordless does not necessarily directly equate to just FIDO. Passwordless means getting rid of passwords, right? So in your optimal scenario, how are you solving for all of those, or are you?
I would say that if you can implement standards and you have the opportunity to do that, then do that. If you have the next best thing, at least as a stepping stone, right? Because again, this industry is all about seeing the end game, course correcting to that, and then knowing that that end state is actually now over here, and now you have to course correct to that. It's just the nature of the identity space. The good news is that we have a whole bunch of standards that surround us and support us, like FIDO2. So if you can get to a FIDO2 control and implement that, great. If you can't, then find your risk partner and look to implement the most trustworthy control you possibly can. And if you can do that with passwordless, to enhance the customer experience, great. One of the things I said to the head of my Center of Excellence person who's here, Roman, I said, the legacy that I have is when I take on a platform, I want to create that platform, provide that platform for my application teams, the business, and at the end of it, when I'm done, I want to leave that platform in such a state that my successor comes along and can easily move to the next standard, the next thing that must happen for that platform. That's the goal, right? And so having standards as a foundation is one of the best ways to do that.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And then, so what about in scenarios where you can't leverage those standards? Or I'll add one more to that. As part of that optimal approach, right, in creating that, that foundation, do you see, requirements for, apps? Would you rather see appless? Do you want the flexibility of both? Like, can you talk a little bit about that, right? Those corner cases where, you might not have everything you need to go full standards based.
Again, it comes down to your risk tolerance, right? Your business's risk appetite. Doing the best you possibly can with the opportunities you have to implement those type of controls. And again, if you can go standards based, then great. There are many ways to make this happen, to provide a passwordless experience, protect the customer. But it ultimately comes down to a risk decision, in my mind.
Got it. And then what about support, omni-channel support, right? We're looking at passwordless, and in my mind, passwordless really means something much deeper. It means, being able to define a much stronger, identity, right? And having a closer mapping to who the user actually is, rather than some user identifier and some secret. It tells you nothing about, who is Rob or who is Craig. So, what about being able to leverage that in, across many channels, without having to register the user again and again and again? And what about even being able to use that in non-digital channels, such as call center and so on?
Right. So, I consider 4 channels of opportunity here. and then the call center as the fifth channel. So the first one is web-based, second is mobile. Third is the integrated voice response systems, and the fourth is your APIs, and all of those are the digital opportunities or digital channels. The fifth one is the call center. All 5 of those channels have the opportunity to use the same types of controls for passwordless. And with the technologies that we have today, whether it's app or appless capabilities, to be able to push a signal to a mobile device to verify someone in a channel that is not the mobile device, right, is a great opportunity for that. And I'll give you an example, just as implementation, if you want to talk about that. So January 2020, when we first created our passwordless proof of concept, we enlisted the help of 150 friends and family, more voluntolds to enroll in our website for this passwordless proof of concept. And basically, you go to the site, you go to our main page, and we had already enabled your passwordless capabilities based on the fact that your mobile app was already active, transmit was already implemented, your biometric was already enrolled and created, and we checked for that. So under the covers, all of the risk signals were collected by our risk engine. So in case there was any issues with any of these people, we would still be able to see them. We never bypassed. And we rolled it out, got lots of kudos. Hey, this is great. I can't believe, no passwords whatsoever. This is awesome. And then we forgot about it for a year. And about a year later, I had the head of the customer experience team call me, and she says, I can't log in. I'm having a problem logging in. Again, this was a proof of concept, so this wasn't, this was in production, but it wasn't a known to our call center about the process of working with a passwordless enabled customer. It was just a proof of concept. So I guess she had trouble logging in, decided she'd call the call center, being a good corporate citizen, asking for them to do help. They had no idea what type of customer she was enrolled in passwordless. So they reset her password and issued her a new password. It completely wiped the flag for passwordless in the system, and of course she couldn't log in. So she called us and we looked, and surprisingly enough, a year later, we said, oh, well, you were a passwordless customer. What happened? Oh, I had a problem. I couldn't log in. I got a new device, and I had to call the call center. So she had gone a year without any support, without complaining whatsoever, never had an issue. And we didn't even know.
It's an amazing story, and what I gather from that is a couple things. One, something Rob said earlier, which is, again, going back to that journey, right? Really understanding that, hey, it's not just about that point in time authentication, but what about, all along the way? And you can see there's a recovery flow, right? There's that circle there, right? So there are ways to do that, and thinking about how you actually do that is, something that you have to consider, right? And in this case, it wasn't rolled out, widespread, right, as you're talking about. So even different groups in the company weren't aware of it. But the good news is that they were able to work for a year, like seamlessly, until she got the new device, and she had to think about enrolling that new device, which is a challenge, right? You have to think about these things. This is something you should make sure, whatever solution you pick, you're asking these questions and saying, well, what happens when you truly get a new device, right? And it's the only one you have. So you don't have another one that you can link to it somehow, and so on. So that's super interesting to me. It shows basically, first of all, the ease of use, but secondly, the second part that you talked about, which is making sure you're really thinking of the life cycle,
right,
end to end.
One thing that would add here too, Craig, is all along the way, when you're talking about each of these different events that are happening, all of these events are not happening in a vacuum. We're all collecting risk data. We're all making risk calculations along the way. Even though you have a customer that comes in with, through passwordless, or they've gone through a recovery process, or we're doing an authorization or a high-risk transaction, underneath the covers, there is a risk engine or some data engine calculating the risk and the trust behind the scenes. So you're always watching.
Makes absolute sense, and I'll kind of piggyback on that. I had someone ask me a question. It was a CISO, and he's like, wanted to basically find out and said, okay, I get it. Here's the passwordless approach, and I get all the benefits of it: ease of use and better security, and prevention of account takeover, and all these wonderful things. And the user is able to establish that strong identity. What then? So I get in. Let's say that the solution invokes FIDO2 WebAuthn. I've got an iPhone. I use biometrics, so it's MFA by default, right? It's a biometric and the device. And now I get in, and what if my session's hijacked? Okay? So to Rob's point, that continual assessment that has to be done after the fact, right? Identity doesn't end there. So whatever solution you're picking or you're putting together, passwordless definitely helps. It's stronger, but you should be thinking about it, and it should be interoperating with continual assessment, right? As you go through, what is the user doing? Building that trust, right? Understanding and gathering details about the user and what they're actually doing and how they're doing it. So it's a great point. So let's kind of flip to, since I got the warning back there, kind of challenges around the passwordless approach, right? So I've listed a few here, right? And we've touched on a few of these before, where you've got to think about all the scenarios. Hey, the device is lost or stolen. I'm trying to replace it. What do I do? By the way, also infrequent usage. So think about, we see this a lot in like insurance and healthcare, where I might not log in except once a year to check my benefits, right? And I'm on the iPhone upgrade program, and I just got a new iPhone. Okay, what then? Okay, FIDO is predicated on PKI, on keys that are stored, right? And what do you do then? Also, something that's not even thought through is user states. And what I mean by that is, if I'm talking about FIDO and I'm on a mobile device or a desktop, it doesn't matter, and I'm using a browser, and I come in and I register for FIDO. Now I change my browser, same machine, same application. Guess what? My registration for FIDO is gone, because that browser is one state. If I clear my cookies, gone. If I come incognito, gone. Okay? So your solution should take those things into account. Otherwise, your users are going to have to re-register again and again and again and again, and you're not going to be able to identify them. So Rob, can you say a little bit about this, right? And here I also go back to being able to provide a solution that's uniform, whether you have an app or not.
So this is where, I've seen a number of passwordless capabilities, products, and including yours. And I've seen your demo a number of times. I've seen people's eyes, widen at just how great it is, and then, they ask, well, what about this? And I say, well, this is really the issue. These are where the customer experience issues come into play. So this is where your contact center needs to be completely educated on how to deal with a customer that has a lost device, that has, they're in a state that they can't log in for some reason. And what you don't want them to do is, oh, well, we're just going to create a password for you and get you going, right? If you are truly in a passwordless state or a passwordless function, then you have to solve the problem and get them to that and keep them there, because otherwise you go back to square one. So again, a lot of this has to do with how your business and your application teams guide the capabilities for trouble logging in, for re-registering devices. Some of the products that like the Transmit product, how they handle lost devices, right? And I think between some of those competing products, how they handle the negative use case is really where you want to be looking, because again, passwordless looks the same across every type of product. The recovery looks different in a lot across every type of product, and how those providers are doing it is really, really important.
It's a great point. So we're kind of at the end of the session, but what I'd love for you to talk about is kind of, in your mind, how aggressive do you think you can get within your own organization and in general? Obviously when we move to passwordless and a new way to authenticate users, it's not a binary thing. A lot of people, just tend to naturally think of, oh, I just flipped the switch and 100% of my users tomorrow are passwordless, right? So one is, what do you think about phasing and getting there and incenting and basically enabling users to get there? And two, how aggressive do you think you can get? Is it something you need to keep measuring and looking at the appetite and the adoption? And lastly, do you think there's a point in time, whether it's 6 months from now or 2 years from now, that you can get to 100% passwordless?
So where do we start? I don't think we're ever going to get rid of passwords totally. That is definitely a goal. It requires the collaboration and the commitments from the application teams, the fraud teams, the cybersecurity teams, your business, to try to drive that forward. If left unchecked, and I'm the first to admit, I'm the one not being the security guy to say I'm slowing you down, but I'm the one looking at all of the different factors involved in actually making a successful passwordless transition and saying, we have these 5 things to do first, or we have these 3 things that have to happen first, like identity consolidation, right? Platform consolidation, modernizing your technologies to support a lot of the back-end work, aligning all of your business teams to one single approach. Those are factors involved that make or break a passwordless, because the last thing we want to do is start this journey, put all of our metrics out there, like we're going to get to 100% in 3 months, right? And then it doesn't work because we just don't have the ecosystem in the business or the ecosystem on the technology side to be successful, to get it done. So you want to set yourself up for success first, and that's what we're trying to do is get all of those stars aligned so that we can jump into the trajectory, right? And so that I don't have to say, whoa, hold on a second, we've got to do this and then we do this.
Awesome. So with that said, I think we're at the end of our time here. Just to kind of round things out, what Rob is talking about, I want to say a little bit about Transmit. We've thought about this when the company was founded back in 2014. I show you one of the original slides. We called ourselves a password replacement toolkit. And the reason why we said that was all around a trajectory of providing a stronger digital identity that was portable and that gave a great user experience. People ask me, why are you called Transmit Security? Why are you not called Transmit Identity? Our DNA is different. So if you look at our founding team, myself included, we come from security and fraud backgrounds, okay? And we believe that identity is so tightly woven with security and has to be. If you're just providing authentication and identity and not thinking about those things, you're just introducing friction with no greater good. Okay, so we've come at it with a completely different approach. We're solving the problem in a different way. We're not predicated upon old technologies, legacy IDP technologies, or user stores that are password driven. And we've been doing this for the last 8 years now. So anyway, thank you all for coming. We're super excited about this. Hope you can hear the passion in my voice. I've been with Transmit since the beginning. And please, we're available for any type of follow-up or questions. But yeah, thanks for your time. And Rob, thank you.
Thank you.